Carla, good afternoon to you. Everything is all set, ready to go. Our speaker's here. We're recording to the cloud. I'm ready to go whenever you are, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Russ, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Carla Lane. I'm the Vice President for the Higher Education Sector for FGDLA. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. It's actually a meeting, so you're going to be able to come off mute and show yourselves if you want to. Don't have to, but if you would like to do that. So we'll be asking Toby questions as he goes along, and if he wants to answer them, he will, and if he doesn't, I guess he won't, but we'll see what happens. So let me tell you,
we can twist his arm, Carla.
You think? So FGDLA is a nonprofit. We're a professional association formed to promote the development and the application of distance learning in the federal government. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and instructional media in support of the education and training needs of the federal government. Our membership is derived primarily from individuals employed by the federal government within the agencies of the federal government. We invite you to join with us in this exciting field. Our web address is there on the screen. It's fgdla.us. And just a brief remark about upcoming events. A reminder that on December 6th, FGDLA will present the awards that honor excellence in training. The submission forms will be available very soon, if not already. We'll check on that later on. We have a number of other topics in the works, so stay tuned. We'll be announcing those soon. And we are so proud that Zoom is a valued sponsor of FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us present the webinars. We'd like to thank Zoom and Russ Colbert for sponsoring today's webinar. They're the best partner that we could have. Thank you so much, Russ.
Carla, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much. It's an honor to serve the federal government, DLA, from a corporate standpoint. So again, our honor. Thank you.
Thank you. So our topic today is about learning science. It will include an overview, application, a Marine Corps case study. This will help us understand retrieval practice, active learning, and more as it relates to in-person and online learning context. We hope you will leave the webinar with actionable techniques to improve instruction with curricula development. Major Toby Pope is a 10-year Marine Corps communications officer. He's currently stationed in 29 Palms, California. He teaches, manages, and develops learning content for the Marine Air Ground Task Force Communication Planners course. That's a mouthful, which covers advanced planning and communication topics to mid-level managers such as captains and majors. He has shifted this into a modified version of HighFlex, and its instruction completely reversed or revised the assessment model in line with evidence-based best practices. He worked with instructors and staff to shift other courses into active learning methods of instruction. His latest projects are focused on micro-learning videos, multiple choice question development, and removing bureaucratic barriers to instructional success. That's the part I want to hear, Toby, really big. So, Major Pope, we're so happy you could develop this webinar for FGDLA. Welcome, and thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. My name is Major Pope, and I'm out here 29 Palms underneath what's called Marine Corps Communication Electronic School, the Communication Training Battalion underneath them. So
Toby,
yes, sir.
Did you just say you're stationed in California?
Yes, sir.
Wow, that's a lot better than Guantanamo Bay or Diego Garcia.
It definitely could be. Yes, sir. I'll say that we're in SoCal, but it kind of belies the fact that we're in the desert and the middle of nowhere. We're kind of 4 hours away from everything.
Well, thank you, Toby, for your service. We appreciate you.
Thank you, sir. Kind of switching for everyone. So want this to be a little bit more or a little bit different than maybe some of the lectures. What I want us to do today to start off with is a Kahoot. So everyone should be able to see the screen for Kahoot. And if you're not already in, please do so. I'm reposting the link for everyone to join. And I'm not going to do math in public, but I saw more than 3 of us in the room. The first couple slide or two, I'll do a little bit of an overview of MCPIC. And then we'll kind of get into some questions, and this will help me scope the content for everyone that is here and make this a little bit more engaging for everyone. Now, I am going to go ahead and start it, but the pin will be at the bottom, and you just log in via kahoot.it or the link that's in the chat. And to start, just a little bit of what is MCPIC. So as Carla mentioned, it is an incredibly long name, but just most basic terms, this is a graduate level IT course. So does 2 courses a year, 15 to 21 students each, excuse me, typically up to 21, 22. The online portion can have 30 something or so students, and I have had as few as 8 students in the resident portion, but that is not very typical. About 7 weeks of it is non-resident, and that is, as mentioned, modified high flex. So it has a synchronous and asynchronous online component. I do kind of use Adobe Connect, I use Kahoot, and I use Teams to make it a little bit more engaging with breakout sessions. And then in July of this year, I'm going to bump that up to 9 weeks. So we're going to add some more content, and I want to refocus some of that. From there, it is graduate level, but it typically has about 6 times the number of hours in the resident course than a normal graduate level course. Although you can say most graduate professors may have more than 1 class, so 3 to 6, so it kind of buffs out. But for the 31 resident training days, you're looking at about 260 hours of instruction versus about 42. And I'm just basing that off very kind of ballpark napkin math of the 14 weeks and 3 hours each week for about 42. So a little bit different in terms of the context, but I do kind of the administration, the development, the tech stuff, and the instruction for the course. And all that is okay, I have to do everything, which is both a benefit and a downside. So if I want to change, I only have to convince one person. It's generally, hey, do you want to do this? And then it kind of happens. But I know at other places that may not be the case. Now, again, kind of going into the pin at the bottom or the link in the chat. If you haven't already, please join us. The next few will be more, okay, hey, how do you, or what do you want to see today? And what's your context? So which of the following best fits your current roles? Are you a teacher, trainer, facilitator, administrator, curriculum developer, or other? Please post in the chat. And I did see that we have a couple of students, so feel free to kind of answer that however you'd like to. Customer success manager, chief learning officer, instructional designer. Okay, definitely got some good ones. It looks like we have mostly curriculum development and kind of evenly spread between teacher, facilitator, and administrator. Okay. That's definitely some goodness. A good bit of this is kind of targeting the instructional design space. And kind of taking a step back, a little bit more of a meta piece with this, just so everyone's on the same page. I'll kind of explain why I'm using some of the technology or some of the choices that I'm making in this presentation as I kind of go through. What I find is really useful for Kahoot or any real-time polling app is to get the baseline for your audience. A lot of times, if you're doing some kind of training and you just kind of ask the group, okay, hey, everyone did the stuff you're supposed to do, right? You will get everyone kind of going, yeah. And then you find out that maybe 1 or 2 people actually did it. If there's a little bit of like an emotional barrier, if there's a real-time polling app like Menti, Kahoot, Poll Everywhere, Quizzes, any of those, you can kind of get an actual assessment of whether people did what you asked them to do for the readings, the read-aheads, etc. And then it can help you scope in your content. You can also get to know your audience just like this, and then you can adjust based off that. So it's useful as a facilitator, teacher, and beyond that, for today specifically, which of the following are you most interested in? And you can select more than one, but out of these, retrieval practice, spacing, active learning, high flex, metacognition, student generated content, are these useful for you? I want to make sure that our conversation is maximized. Okay, so active learning and followed by metacognition, followed by student-generated content retrieval practice. Okay, so I'll be demonstrating some active learning techniques and a little bit of science there, kind of up front, and retrieval practice. We're going to hit that a little bit more, but I'll try to get to some of the metacognition of student-generated content as well. Beyond this, so were you able to review the read-ahead materials? And before you kind of dive on the inside a little bit, there were no read-aheads, but I left this in here from when I used this in person to, like, this is how I gauge my audience. Like, hey, I try to throw a little bit of humor. There are read-aheads, because sometimes people do show up when I say, hey, you should do read-aheads. Here they are. And they're like, wait, I never got that. It's like, no, you definitely did, but it's useful again for scoping. And this one, so I typically tie this question more specific to the context of the brief that I'm doing. But for everyone here, technically I'm a practitioner. As a Marine, I have not received formal training to the same degree that many of you have. And we have PhDs, and we have many different kind of educational contexts. So for here, I would generally expect far more yeses. However, especially for practitioners, this is not always the case. And then even for those that do have PhDs, I'm sure that everyone is tracking that not everyone receives actual instruction on how to teach, or if it does, it is more finite and compressed. So I kind of say that to say, in my bureaucratic context, I've been trying to make a lot of change. And one of the big things that I tossed to them is we don't have the continuity to do a lot of science and to do a lot of actual testing and evaluation assessment of how effective we're doing things, because the variables change, people move, etc. So for our context, what I argue is most effective is we take a look at the academic literature and then see what's relevant and then put it into our context as quickly as possible. So that I find is useful. And Carla, I know you mentioned, like, how do we get beyond the those bureaucratic barriers? I'll show you some data. The biggest takeaway for kind of everyone here is the faster you can show data in your context that something is working, the faster you will have adoption for everyone else. And I say faster, but it's taken a few years for things that I thought would take literally a couple of weeks. So it is a slow process regardless of your context. Now, this is a little bit more opinion-based, but in your opinion, are multiple choice question tests useful? And for those of you that just joined and you're not on Kahoot, again, the game pin is kind of at the bottom. The link is in the chat, so you can join us via kahoot.it and through those numbers. But I would say a lot of times I see far more no's on this. I'm glad to see that there are less. However, the biggest thing that I kind of toss out is that it's just like any other tool. If you use it wrong, it is going to be painful. It's going to be less useful. So if you have a nail and you're trying to hammer it, well, you probably want to hammer. Would a saw work? Sure, but you're kind of living life on hard mode. So there are things that tests are better for, and things that tests are not quite as good for. And some of the benefits are absolutely the fact that as an instructor, one of one, I don't have to grade things when it's a multiple choice question test. So you'll see in some of the data that I have, I've been using evidence-based best practices to make those questions more useful, and then using that as a baseline that we can then get to higher level concepts. From there, so how much of their brain does the average person use? And I asked this in a poll because I'm expecting a good number of wrong answers here, and that's perfectly fine. It's to demonstrate a good, it's to demonstrate something. Okay, so the myth, and this is specifically called a neuromyth. I will post into the chat now a link to a literature review over this. But you can kind of think of it very similar to how, like as a kid, I thought that you could see from outer space, just like with the naked eye, you could see the Great Wall of China, because it just made sense to me. And then somebody pointed out, I was probably way older than I should have been, but somebody pointed out, like, if that was the case, then all of the roads across the United States would also be naked or visible to the naked eye. And that is not the case. So this is in the literature a neuromyth. It is something like a misunderstanding of how things work. But most people think that it is about 10%, and it is actually 100%. So as far back as the 70s, with MRIs and other types of scans, we were able to see that the entire brain lights up with cognition and thinking. However, even and this is the beautiful part about that literature review that I posted, even in neuroscience programs, this type of myth perpetuates. So I bring this up to just kind of demonstrate that there's misconceptions about learning, and they are pervasive in a lot of different contexts, including those that you would think, well, they should know, like, what is correct. Can move into the next one. Do people learn better if you teach them in their preferred learning style? Visual, kinesthetic, etc.
Malcolm Knowles. Carla and I have studied his works over and over again, and Jolly and Sandy, all of us. So boy, he proposed this question and justified it many times.
But the problem is that the evidence base does not actually demonstrate that if I teach you in the preferred learning style, that you'll understand that information better. And I will back this up with a couple of the evidence or the literature reviews for this. But kind of the short answer is that there is no empirical data that justifies this. It is very tempting to say that if you tailor your instruction to someone, that they will learn better, but there's no support of this. And while kind of the key takeaways here is, while people have preferences, and you may like have a preference, it doesn't increase your learning. Now, there are evidence-based things such as dual coding, where you have a visual and you have either spoken or written text. Those things actually drive learning, but the learning styles do not. And this is kind of there's a huge silo for this one. It is very pervasive in a lot of different contexts. Specifically, the K-12 is a big one, as well as higher education. It's a little bit less now in some of the corporate education contexts, but I would just kind of highlight that preferred learning styles do not actually drive learning any more effectively. There are some things that do, but there's better takeaways for everyone. And I will post I'm looking at my cheat sheet below, and looks like I forgot to copy and paste the link for that one. I'll get it a little bit later. But there are some literature reviews that basically support or say that there is no support for this. Moving from there, and this is a military context. I specifically kept this in so we could kind of see me adapting this, and I cut the time so we wouldn't spend too much time on it. But UAS, the smallest is a Black Hornet. Key takeaway with this one isn't, I didn't really want anyone to get it right or wrong, just more so this is one way that I'm adapting what I'm going to be showing to my audience. So for this one, it was with a bunch of ground combat element Marines, so infantry officers, infantry staff and COs, or basically middle managers that were very tied into what they knew about the world, and they had very specific understandings. And I wanted to show them that multiple choice question tests, which they were shying away from completely, that those could be useful and demonstrate a specific use case for them. And I'll say about half of them get it right, half of them get it wrong. Another one, kind of the same area. Good job, Keith. Which one is longer? And I've shortened the time on this one as well to about 10 seconds. And the key thing here is that they are the same length, but taking a look at it, your initial understanding, whenever you first initially see this, before you measure it, you see A as longer than B. And with that, it kind of shows the imperative for each of us that we have to measure what it is that we're doing in our context. If we just go off of how we feel or how things look initially, we're not actually getting to the best learning and retention that we can. A data-driven approach is kind of underpinning a lot of the things I want to show today. But at the end of the day, we should be absolutely measuring what it is that we're expecting. Did get a message to go ahead and repost the Kahoot link. I apologize. This one, it's already over for this. We'll go ahead and go to the next one, or a slide deck. So I do got have some additional interactive things, but it's not going to be quite so fun. Okay, so for learning science, the things we're going to talk about, and just to make sure everyone can see my screen saying overview, science of learning, active learning, etc. See some head nods. Okay. So these are the things throughout. I'm going to have some results in how to / my context specifically, but this is or should be adaptable to pretty much everyone. Some of the challenges here, and again, MCAGCC is Marine Corps Communication Electronics School. So this is like my boss's boss. I tossed over to them, their academic administration team. Hey, I need some help, and this is like what I need from you. The challenges. So in the Marine Corps right now, we're calling something 21st century learning, 21CL, and it is a buzzword completely. So it tells us that we need to change, but it doesn't tell us how to change, which is both an opportunity and a vulnerability. The science of learning.
Third decade of this century. I mean, I'm so tired of 21st century learning. I don't know. I won't let anybody use it in papers. So if you're using it, Toby, you need to quit.
So I will go ahead and say that I don't necessarily care for it, but it's one of the words that my higher level people like appreciate, and that's kind of what they're used to. So it's just using the language of those that I have to convince. And if they dislike 21CL, I'd spin it a different way. And for everyone here, whatever your context is, the key takeaway for some of this is just adapt it to your context. For science of learning, it isn't integrated. To put this in a civilian perspective, this is very much so kind of a trade school where you have subject matter experts that know stuff and things, but they don't necessarily know how to teach. And that is a struggle to get them where they can teach. The instructors, like we say 21st century learning, they're like, cool story, bro. What's that? I don't know how to spell it. Like, what are we talking about? And much less how to actually implement it. So that is a challenge here. And then the last two, they do flashy techniques that have good engagement, but they don't drive learning. And they think they have less freedom than they actually do. So those are challenges that are unique, or not unique. I think they're pretty common for context, but that is challenges here. I say the results is wasting our time, energy, money, and it's just less effective. So what I kind of have us do is active learning, and we'll kind of talk about it. So what I want us all to do now is to take a minute and think about active learning. And for that, you can substitute with adult learning or 21CL. I kind of put those in parentheses because that's context specific labels for a couple of different contexts that I briefed in. So those are more intuitive for you. You can define those instead. But go ahead and think first, type out your answer in the chat, but don't post it into the chat until I kind of give the signal. We'll take a minute to go and do this. If everyone can go and type that. Okay, and if I can go ahead and get everyone to post it now, looks like most are kind of already doing that. I'll say that this takes the place of a big pair share that you would have in the classroom. So a lot of times via distance, synchronous, I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but you can have people think, type, post, and it's a little bit faster to get to the kind of debrief with the students. So I see individual engagement, learner-centered instruction, definitely some goodness there, collaboration, making sure that they are present, relevant. That's good from Colin. For Ms. Finner, learning that is engaging and relevant, applying the content. Okay. Sandy's got a very complete one, which is outstanding. Student and teacher collaboration, definitely some trends here and definitely some goodness from everyone. So what I'll do now is kind of go into a definition for here, definition for my context that we kind of used. And just one definition in general is active learning is far better than passive. And I'll get to a really good 2019 Harvard study that I think is illustrative of this fact and some key takeaways for everyone here in a moment. But desirable difficulty. So I compare it to PT, physical training, or for everyone else, kind of weight training, weightlifting. You want things to be difficult. This is not too intuitive for many, but you do want it to be difficult. Just like if you're in the gym, and I bring this up because a lot of people that are brief are kind of gym rats to say the least, and they look like 10 times the size of me. I'm just like, wow, what are you doing? But I'll kind of make the joke like, hey, if I go into the gym and I lift with a bar, like I'm probably getting a good workout. And then I'll pick out some of the big guys in the room and I'll be like, you need like at least 5 times that amount. But comparing it to the relevant context helps people kind of click on, okay, hey, it actually is supposed to be difficult with this. And then I think we got a lot of the other items here, the student ownership, with collaboration, getting people thinking instead of just sitting in receive mode, and then information out instead of information in. And I'll talk a lot about that here in a moment.
Hey, Toby.
Yes, sir.
Could I share with everyone just a really quick experience? When I went to officer candidate school for the U.S. Navy, we didn't get much sleep. And so we were always tired and we were always in training classes. And so I had one particular time where a student raised his hand and asked the question, and the instructor was answering the question. And while the answer was being given, the student fell asleep. Do you think that's active learning?
No, and kind of given how much we know about just generally how important sleep is, I have to imagine that people might remember a little bit, like kind of spotty, some of the things that were there, but probably didn't remember too many of those classes. Just giving a guess.
It created a good memory.
Yeah.
It's definitely fair. For everyone here, and thank you for the story, sir. For everyone here, active learning, this is from, I was kind of saying a Harvard 2019 study, and I want to bring everyone's attention to here on the right. And you'll see at the bottom, I enjoyed this lecture. The blue is passive and the red is active. So enjoying the lecture, passive wins by a mile. I feel like I learned a great deal from the lecture. Passive wins. Instructor was effective at teaching, which has implications because I know many civilian institutions, the student evaluation drives a lot of the retention and the promotion process, but passive wins for the instructor effectiveness. And then I wish all my physics courses were taught this way. And I specifically bring up this study because one of the pushbacks in the academic literature was, or really just an implementation of a lot of active learning techniques and strategies was, well, that'll never work in my context. That'll never work for me. It's just too difficult. Like, sure, that works for humanities, that works for, whatever other, but I'm physics. Like, physics is way more difficult. And I like this study because there's no course here that teaches something more difficult than physics. Unless you actually teach physics, then I guess well, same, there's equality there. But for all my courses, that's just not the case. Probably the most important takeaway is if you look at the test of learning, you look at how effectively people understood the material, the test of learning actually wins. Active learning wins in this case. And I did see one request for defining passive. Defining passive is kind of the opposite of active, and it's more a teacher-centric, stage on the stage, here's a lecture, and I'm going to talk at you. So if I didn't have any kind of student interaction or any kind of participant interaction in this conversation, that would be far more passive. Now I've tried, it is kind of difficult given the context, but you will see different examples of how to make this more active and engaging. But I kind of put those two separate. You can have engagement without it being active learning. Everybody can just like be all happy, smiles, everything's good. But if it doesn't get at your core learning objectives or goals, then all you're doing is keeping people happy. You're not really driving learning. And Colin posted edutainment in the chat. That is exactly it. It's not actual education. It's just entertaining somebody. So this one, there are other studies out there. There's a very wide literature based on active learning, but I like this one because I like visuals. And I think it demonstrates a lot of the key concepts that I'm trying to get other people to understand.
Toby, let me point out, go back to that slide for a second.
Yes, ma'am.
If you look at the scales, the one on the left is up to 1 and the one on the right is up to 5. So those are not exactly proportional, right? So if the 1 was really a 1 on the left, it would be down, it would be like a ½ an inch high. I'm just trying to compare. Graphically, it looks like they're really similar, but they're not because the scale of the graphic is different. That's my point.
Okay, that's actually a really good point. And I think here, what I would just kind of emphasize is the score. So 1 being the maximum, you're looking at a full letter grade difference between passive and active learning, whereas the level of agreement being on a Likert scale of 1 to 5 for the passive versus active on the right-hand side. I see Jolly asking, hey, is the left based on correlation, or is there actual causation here? And part of the reason that I have this study specifically is the study design and how they set it up was incredibly just effective, where they took the same professors, the same class groups, and they basically taught passively these items to this group for these sections. And they taught that actively to the other group, and they switched, and they were able to really do away with a lot of the okay, that doesn't work because what about this one variable? They really isolated the variables incredibly well. And I can post, although if you just look up 2019 Harvard active learning study, there's the actual study itself, and then there's a little easier to read just news article that I can post for y'all.
That's really interesting because I'm surprised that the active learning, because it doesn't peak on any of those. And if the point is that we believe that active learning is really important, and that's what we want to do, and the instructional designers in us want to do active learning, then why is it in this particular study that it doesn't peak any better until you get to the test of learning? And then it's only, like a point, half a point. I'm not sure what I'm really looking at on that thing.
So you brought up a really good point that I forgot to draw up for this. The authors of the study and kind of highlight that passive people like it a little bit more, but the active drives more learning. However, one of the ways that you can, as an instructor, mitigate that is briefing your people or informing them of things like this. Hey, kind of goes back to the desirable difficulty. Most people feel that if it's difficult, it is because we're doing it wrong, because that is kind of what we've talked about or what we've been taught since we're little. If it's difficult, hey, it's I'm good. Whereas passive is typically a little more enjoyable. You sit back, you relax, you just kind of listen in. But active here, you're actually doing and demonstrating the principles.
Well, if you look at American education, K through 12, we tell everybody to sit down and shut up for 12 years. And then we get them in college and we go, what's wrong with you? You can't think, you have no critical thinking powers, you can't conjugate a verb. And then we get them into graduate school, and we've got a lot of graduate students here today. And they're, to some extent, a lot of graduate students also want to be passively educated because it's easier. It's easier on them. So
Yes,
the
ma'am.
instructor's doing all the heavy lifting instead of the student. And so your point about it being difficult is important because it is a challenge, but it's so completely different than what we've come to learn in America. It's an unfortunate situation. I will let you have your screen back. Thank you very much.
Toby, if I may add something to that, great points that you both are making. And this really, to me, addresses one of the points you made on the previous slide about the training should be difficult, because active learning, when a student first looks at it, is very difficult. And once they become involved, all of a sudden, and I've seen it just working with some of our students, even some of our instructors that we train here who are just learning to use some of the technologies like book widgets. And I had an instructor here this week, and I was helping her, and I made her go in and just experiment. I tried to, and all of a sudden she looked at me and she went, I got it. But it was very difficult. I mean, you're laughing. I know it's kind of like, when you're, DOD stuff, you get resistance and then all of a sudden people open their minds up. But I think this is a really good example of your point about how the difficulty of training, people are reticent because they've been conditioned. And because what smacked very importantly here is that it was a lecture, and lecture to me, I cringe now, because I wish we could rename it, even though some lectures can be very interactive. You could call this a lecture, but it's really not. It's very engaging. So thank you for that. This is an incredible way to make that point.
Well, thank you very much, ma'am. And thank you, Carla, and everyone for kind of extending this. I'll make sure to get in the chat, probably post the recording, the link to this. But again, it's the 2019 Harvard Active Learning, and you'll probably be able to find it just from that. If you see this picture, it's the right one. And kind of selected it for how easy this one is to kind of relate for everyone. Moving on from this though, so very briefly, HighFlex, I'll just say that there's a face-to-face, there's an online synchronous seminar, and there's online asynchronous discussion boards. I did that in the military context. It's a little bit modified because somebody else actually teaches the face-to-face part, but I developed the curriculum, so all three of these are being done. Since most people weren't really too invested in this, I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. But for in the chat, I've got knowledge and critical thinking. And if everyone can like, which one did they think is most important? And I'll come back to why here in a moment, but please like one of the two, knowledge or critical thinking. Okay, and as far as like a distance learning or a synchronous learning session like this, having it dropped into the chat and then have everyone like it is one way to do a poll without having to do a poll and open up Kahoot or do something like that. So it's a fast kind of off the cuff, and it gets your attendees responses pretty quickly. And it looks like critical thinking, for the most part, I've got one knowledge, and I got mostly critical thinking in both. Colin seems to have got the Harvard study, so thank you, Colin. Definitely really appreciate that. And the kind of reason that I ask which is more important, I'd like for everyone to think critically about this specific abstract. And if you can, the highlighted part, I'd like everyone to read that for a moment. So think critically about this. And typically, I don't have any neuroscience people in the room in the Marine Corps. Shocker, I know, but the majority of people, and myself included, like, I'm from backwoods Georgia. I don't even know what half these words mean. And as Carla kind of alluded to, and many of us hit, that it is both knowledge and critical thinking that we need to have. And I would just kind of emphasize Bloom's taxonomy. The lowest level is kind of the knowledge piece before you get into creation. I know there's issues with Bloom's taxonomy, but it's a useful enough model. To get a critical thinking, you have to have the baseline knowledge. So I can't get my people to do the things that I need them to do critically without baseline knowledge in certain things. We got to have an understanding of what the words mean, and we have to be able to move in the right direction first. And here, I think, is just one way. Like, you couldn't expect anyone to just think critically about this. We have to have knowledge first. To that end, a lot of my focus has been on multiple choice question tests. I'm getting there because it is a good way to do this. So retrieval practice. The academic literature has probably the most overwhelming support for retrieval practice as a method of learning. And it's a strategy where we focus on getting the information out, whereas passive is more getting the information in. Now, these are a couple of studies that just demonstrate, and what I'll kind of sum this up, if after 5 minutes, the S's over here mean that somebody reread the material, then reread, test, then a 5-minute delay, final test. And the green is you read the material, reread the material, test, 5-minute delay, final test. That 5-minute delay, you'll see that the reading had the highest effect, the percentage of the information that was recalled. So cramming absolutely works in the short term. And if I ask, hey, who here is crammed? Every single one of us raise their hands. We have absolutely done that at one point. But what we find is even after 1 week delay, cramming is the least effective. So less than half of the material is now retained versus testing or a modified form of retrieval practice. Far more of that information is retained in the long term. And this has key things because I don't want my people just to pass a test. I want my people to be able to go to the Marine Corps after my course and actually perform as they're expected. And I think that's for all of us here, regardless of our context, regardless of what course we teach. We want our people to be able to do the thing that we're trying to get them to do in their context. And that takes time. So the current model for most of our courses, kind of like this. This is if we're doing it well. We may have some quizzes, half the time we don't. We may have a practice test, half the time we don't. And then we may have an Annex A test. And we have annexes, you can call it a, by any name, like a lesson, a topic, a chapter. But once you're done with one of the annexes, you data dump everything and you're never tested on it again. This is very common in the Marine Corps.
In the military.
Yes, sir.
It is.
And what I would advocate for is actually having spacing and interweaved content through all of the lessons and the practice tests and the tests, so that the content you start at the very beginning of your course to the very end of your course is interweaved throughout, and you can't forget something. Again, as far as Bloom's taxonomy, at the bottom, the remembering and understanding, like the facts piece, enable you to get to the creation. And there is something to be said about space learning. So spacing's the next piece, although I don't think we'll get to that today. So open book, closed book, if you can, instead of posting your response, if you can like the two options that I'm putting there, it'll be easier to tell visually how many responses. But in general, if you have, this may change your response. If the open book and the closed book, same learning objectives, and the closed book is objectively more difficult, which one would have a higher grade, an open or closed book? And I'll get to in the next slide why the closed book is objectively more difficult, other than the fact that it's a closed book. So I'm seeing mostly open with a couple that are actually just one that is saying closed. Well, what I did, and this kind of goes to the bureaucratic piece, I said, hey, retrieval practice is going to be really good. This is key. We should do this. We should implement it in our courses. Sir, I need you to make the command decision and make all of our courses do this. And I got the equivalent of that sounds great, really good science.
Blank, 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 blank.
I'll just say that we still have not implemented it as of time now. And despite having incredibly intelligent people involved in that decision, there are so many competing priorities, everything, that it's just difficult. So the way to convince people a lot of times is have data demonstrating the use. And you can do that a lot of times in one small course or your course. And again, going back to I'm just me, I only had to convince myself. And guess what? I was pretty convinced. And this is a very busy slide. This was a storyboard that was produced up for hire. And I want to walk everyone starting with kind of the bottom left of the results. And then I'll get into kind of what you'll see that we move from, well, 50 question test, change it from open to closed book, or moved all true false questions. And I put multiple choice questions with plausible answers. So plausible answers, and let's say my stereotypical example is in the Marine Corps, an interior routing protocol. What is it that we use on the LAN, the local area network? And the options are BGP, EIGRP, potato, chair. You don't have to know anything about IT to know that it's not chair and it's not potato. And yet a lot of times people will have those two. Now, for once we move to this closed book, you'll see the GPA. 2 Check 20 was 93. 1 Check 21, 95, and then 97.83 whenever it was closed book. Percentage of students scoring 100 went up and test duration went down. So this is them actually knowing and understanding the material. The in the chat, we're talking about open book, allowing lookup and applying. So the literature here definitely has a lot of really good points. In some ways, the open book test can be useful. The key thing here, going back to, let's see if I can go back, with Bloom's taxonomy, the open book test, the way it was before, was not creation. It wasn't actually applying the material. It was all basic memorization. It's basic understanding. So I'll say that I was a student in this 2 Tech 20 class, and whenever the instructor said, hey, this is going to be open book, I dropped my pack so fast, you would have whiplash. Like I was studying, and then they said, hey, it's going to be open book. You can control F this. It'll be super easy. And I was like, okay, cool, bet. And then I did other stuff because I had a lot of things on my plate. The difference for this course, I gave them quizzes to study, and then they had to have the materials. They had to understand it. They had to apply it. And we moved from there. So it was all more the knowledge piece. For this, even the open book test, whenever it was there, by moving to closed book, we didn't really lose anything. And the academic literature, the way that I kind of understand this one, there is a good bit of tension between, hey, should we have closed book or open book? The takeaways that I would have for everyone is open book. If you're applying principles and you're having to do analysis in that moment, open book is beautiful. If you're forcing somebody to understand facts, which is what I have to do as a part of my instruction, then open book is no good. It does not increase their retention, etc., for having an open book. Now, there are some other like asterisks that could have there, but just in general, closed book is best for understanding or kind of knowledge recall.
Toby, if you wanted to do both, I mean, maybe your situation in the military is different than, you know, other situations. I would want students to know the facts and be able to apply them. And that's why I think that the open book is better, but it doesn't mean that the student doesn't read the book or doesn't study the content. Like, as you said, I mean, when it was time, you just put everything down and said, oh, well, I don't need that. But because you assumed what the test was going to be. And if the test is just regurgitation of facts, who needs it? That's the point.
And Thank you for kind of bringing that up. The other piece, like the actual using of these facts, is demonstrated in a different exercise. So I've got a TDG, a tactical decision game with kind of a what do you call it, like a mastery or a project-based thing that the students have to do that demonstrates more of the higher level stuff. And the test is more focused on kind of the lower level. So I have those in conjunction. And I'm able to do that just because of the context and how long I have them here. So I've got several tests that they have to take that hits lower stuff, and then the higher stuff is tested in other ways.
Okay, thanks for the explanation.
Yes, ma'am. And sorry for kind of missing that the first time. For the next couple slides, as we're kind of getting at the 1 hour mark, I just want to kind of highlight that practice exam attempts, the more that the students did them, the higher their final test grade, which may seem intuitive, but the students, even kind of saying this without them seeing something like this, and this just increases the likelihood that students will engage in effective study habits versus highlighting versus a lot of things that we know isn't as effective for study. These are some of the grades, and some general takeaways is that most people, so the blue, this is an incredibly busy slide. This is the training day 1. This is what they had as their very first test whenever they got to the resident portion. You'll see that the blue is okay, what it is, but every single person across, or almost every person got higher on the midterm. There were some exceptions over here in the second course last year, but almost all got better. And that is despite the next tests having far more material as it was cumulative. So had increased learning over time. For the quizzes, I would just say that having highest score, unlimited attempts, cumulative with random questions from a question bank. We use Middle as our LMS, and this is something we can definitely, or we have set up with randomized answers. And then having that as a low stakes or percentage of the overall score. Ideally, 30% of the test is never seen before. That was an objective that I had for this when I first started. But I'll say that if you've got a big enough question bank, it doesn't necessarily matter as much as you would think. I've got over 550 questions that hit a variety of topics, and that is only continuing to grow. And while the best students, they get all of it, the rest of the students have a tiny bit more struggle. Just say that. So this is not. Go ahead.
Quick question. Do you have any classes where you don't do testing? I mean, universities where I teach, we haven't used testing in years. And again, I think it's because of context, the content that you're teaching. But I just wondered if there's ever a time when you don't use testing.
I'll say we use it, but it's also the least effective out of most of the courses as of right now. So it's least effective because the majority of the questions are very, very poorly designed. They come from true false, which are hard to do correctly. They have all the above, none of the above, and they don't adhere to evidence-based best practices, so they're not as effective. Part of this is using the best practices for all of those questions on the knowledge piece and then kind of moving from there. There are courses that mostly do their stuff through MAGTF. And in my context, the reason that I'm harping on quizzes as much here is because MAGTF is so intensive for the instructors to really QC and make sure that the students are doing in the grading. So what I try to do is give the instructors, hey, yeah, that's great, you can still do it. But additionally, you should have these tests and quizzes that help on some of the basics. And I know higher education isn't very receptive to multiple choice questions in general and those types of tests. But speaking as somebody that's gone through 2 or 3 different graduate programs, there are misconceptions that the students have that could be remedied through approaches like this. Did that answer the?
No, I would not throw out tests. I think that they can be very effective. It's just everything is based upon context and content. And so you really have to pick and choose what you're doing and what you want to accomplish, as well as the level of person with whom you're dealing. Those are I think the important things to look at. So I'm not saying don't use a test. I'm just saying pick and choose when you use it. And it
Yes,
sounds
ma'am.
like what you're doing. Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I want you to continue. I don't want to, but all of all of these conversations have sparked some interesting thoughts for me because I'm developing on a daily basis with focused objectives, and I find that sometimes the name of quizzes inspires fear for some students, and maybe we need to rename them, because my quizzes, and again, they can occur before or after a lesson, or an end course assessment, and they actually are powerful learning tools. And it could be just that educating, because many, like Kahoot, you're competing, or you keep recycling information. And I think the assessment piece, and again, it goes back to the way you frame those points that you're making about input out, and that to me is the best assessment you could get. So, and my other question is, do you find that you would get different results depending upon the subject matter that you were teaching? Is that something you've considered? And I'm curious, because if you look at foreign language education, which is what DLI is all about, I find that just because of the nature of our mission and the information and where our students need to be, some of these things take on a different form for us, and they're very, very effective.
Just to clarify, Sandy is with the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, for those of you.
Sorry.
DLI.
Thanks, Carla, for reading my mind.
Welcome again.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll take a very a stab at answering that, and then I will shift over to some resources and kind of close out, because I know the 1 hour mark and people will have to start leaving. One thought to kind of close out from Carla's piece, just the last of this, is that the current kind of best practice that I can see in the literature is combining these multiple choice question tests with essay or short answer on the concepts. So you get kind of both. It's not all multiple choice questions. You'd also combine that with Prac App, combine that with conversations in a context like DLI. Like all these things are useful to kind of use for your assessment. As far as the content, I would say, yes, there's probably some content that would lend itself a little bit better to some of these approaches. However, what I would kind of say for everyone is that there are elements of knowledge that, regardless of context, that are useful to kind of apply this approach to. And it can be as simple as understanding your academic discipline, some of those key concepts or words that mean things, but people get misunderstood a lot of times. You can have it be a quiz and then move to higher level stuff in your instruction and the rest of your course. So it takes some of the burden off of you to have to explain and re-explain some of the same things. Now, to kind of shift, we had spacing and a whole bunch of other things that I wanted to talk about. The piece that I would just kind of toss out to everyone: small teaching, make it stick, powerful teaching, and design for how you learn. These are 4 incredible responses. And if you're like me with a backwoods Georgia public school education, these 3 even have an audiobook. So you can have somebody else literally read it to you. Highly recommend that. And I will kind of close here and shift over to y'all for comments.
Toby, I think you've got so much information. While we're in front of everybody, I'd like to ask you to do another session. Would you agree to that?
Oh, absolutely, ma'am. I'd love to.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll go ahead and plan that. Thank you.
And Toby, just for me personally, I was wondering if I can contact you. I think maybe, we can do a Marine Army collaboration, if that would be okay, or just chat a bit. Oh, great. Thank you. So
Yes,
I have
ma'am.
your permission then.
Yes, ma'am. And
Thanks.
I dropped my
really
personal
appreciate
cell for everyone, personal
Okay.
cell, and my
Thank
work
you.
email.
Good. I think I'll post that. I'll post that on
Thank you
Facebook.
so much.
If I get prank calls, I'll know who to kind of blame here. I'm
Carla.
looking at you, Russ.
Oh,
But
Carla, blame Carla.
Yeah, always.
Toby, I want to just quickly thank you. Your level of service is amazing to all of your students. Thank you so much.
I agree. Thank you.
Toby,
Toby.
I want to jump into and say thanks. I know we connected, this is Erica. We connected a while ago, and it's really great to see this presentation. And I'm sure we'll be hitting you up also to help out with the Marine Corps' virtual learning workshop. So thank
For
you.
those of you who don't know, Erica Jacobs is president of FGDLA and a Marine, works at, where do you work? Which?
CDET, the College of Distance Education and Charity for the Marine Corps.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Well, we are
Yep.
at time, so we will conclude this. Toby, thank you. The webinar was really outstanding, and we will plan another one. And we want to thank you for joining us and being part of FGDLA today. And to all of those of you who joined with us, we appreciate you being here. Please look at our website, fgdla.us. If you are military or government in some way, our membership is open and there is no charge for it. We try to do everything to support people who are instructional designers and trainers within the federal government. So thank you for being with us today. We enjoyed it. Good night.